the second model in the recommended models is the workflow model. From the name, it is supposed to represent workflow, so some sort of behavior, okay? The sequences of actions to be done in order to satisfy the requirements or needed to be done on the system. Now, you can use the activity diagram or a simplified version of the activity diagram to create the workflow model. Now, we know that these are the symbols used in the activity diagram, the UML activity diagram. Generally, these two, the parallel representation here, are not necessary. So the simplified version just include the sequence of activities and branching. So you know the decision symbol is used to indicate branching or set of possible actions a person can choose from. Okay, so these just the activity itself, a connector to represent a sequence, and a decision like this diamond to represent a branching or possible paths to go through, and you know the start and the end symbols. These are sufficient for the workflow model. And it is very important to know that we're not talking about actions done on the system in terms of like click a button or open a drop-down menu or click on a link. No, here at this point, we're talking about activities or actions from the business point of view. So let's say the person or the user need to choose one of the elements. Okay, so choose one of the elements is the activity here. Not click on a drop-down menu because you don't know whether it's going to be implemented as a drop-down menu or as another type of menu or just a set of buttons. You don't know how is it going to be implemented at this point. Okay, at this point, we just put the activity from the end user point of view, what action needs to be done, not what not on the level of a click or a link or a button. You're not describing at this level, okay? You're describing the activity at a high level in terms of actions needed to be done for the business to be met, okay? The required business activity to be met. So this is a business activity, not a mouse click or a button click or a choice in a menu. Okay, so this is a high level activity. Now again, the general rule, we create the models progressively and in a hierarchical decomposition up to 3 levels with 4 or 5 elements in each level. So an example of that, so these are the high level activities and the sequence between them. Now we take one to move, so this is level 1. We take one of them and break it down. Now you can put them together like this, or you can split them into different documents. So here, this is an example of splitting the levels into separate documents or separate diagrams. So you take one of the activities. Now you put the sub activities within here. You can put them together. So we broke these for this is level 3. So we took one of the activities here and broke it down into its sub activities. And not all activities has to be broken down if we're gonna put this holistic or general view. So you can see here this activity was just one activity, not more. Doesn't have sub activities here, but this one has sub activities and so on. Okay. So depends on how complex your diagram is. Generally, it is easier if you can split it, but we have to make sure that we can maintain the link between the levels so that we can trace it back to if we want to zoom out to see the high level view, we should be able to. If we need to zoom in to see the low level point of view, we should be able to. Now you can organize it the way you wish. Now the next level, the next model is the data model. okay? Or it is to model structure, not behavior. So this is pretty much the high level point of view that eventually will lead to the entity relationship diagram that you learned in the database management course, or the class diagram. Okay, so this is a high level. Now the class diagram or the ERD or the entity relationship diagram requires specifying a high level of details that may not be present at this moment. We're still in the early stage in the system. We don't have that enough understanding that we can create a full class diagram or a full ERD diagram. So this is the data model is a high level or a simplified entity diagram that later on can evolve into a class diagram or an ERD. Okay, so as you already learned about when we create the class diagram, you look into the nouns as suggested or recommended or possible entities or classes. Okay, and adjectives are usually the attributes or properties. But again, we want to create this model in a progressive manner and in hierarchical decomposition up to 3 levels with 4 elements. Now the elements here are the entities for the data model. Now as we go from, so we know that the box in the class diagram and in the entity diagram, like a rectangle represents an entity, right? Now if we want to take one entity and break it down into sub-entities under the same title, then we can use this entity group that is a dashed rectangle. Let's see an example here. So this is the at this level, so this is the general entity, okay? The public, transactions, license and regulations, regulated parties. So this is like the high level or level 1 entities in the data model. Now let's say we're gonna take these regulated parties and break it down. Now before, there are also relationship between the entities, okay? But here we just assume that it's all many to many and it's all like one direction. Okay, we're not supposed to add the details of the like multiplicities and the details of the associations now. It's just that we know that there's some relationship between regulated parties and license and regulation. We can describe it generally with hold. The multiplicities and all the details of the relationship can be done later on in like later stages of the development when we collect more information and we have better understanding of the details. Okay, so at this point, we just general entities, so it's the level 1, general entities, okay, and their relationships. Okay, now we take this when we go from level 1 to level 2, we take one of them, let's say related parties, and we break it down into the entities, more specific set of entities that all fall under that general category. So the entity that we specified at level 1 becomes a group, okay? So what are the entities that can be under the title of regulated parties? We have natural person, entities, third parties, okay? So we took one of the elements here, one of the entities here, and broke it down into more detailed set of entities. Okay, now all these entities can still have the whole relationship with licenses and regulations. And when we start breaking down the others, it like we have to figure out how the relationship is maintained. All right. The fourth model, or the fourth model is the business rules, and this is not a visual model. This is a word-based model. So it's just a set of business rules specified like as constraints. Okay, so for example, loans of 100,000 or more must be approved by a senior officer, and so on. So the general rules or general constraints that needed to be considered when you create the system. So this is the model here. And then finally, the user interface design. As we mentioned before, it is user interface design can be used as an overlapping tool that can be used in the requirements analysis and also in the requirement elicitation and also in the design when we get to be more specific about the interface design. But here we have an interface design that collects or summarizes what we learned about the requirements. All right. So here's an example. Now you can use what you know from the domain model to have the general categorization or the general tabs in the system. You can use the data model to know what information needs to be presented. Okay, you can use the workflow model to specify how the links are. So let's when you need to go from one place to the other, so you need to add a link or somehow to move from one activity to the other. So you can use the workflow for that. And you can use the business rules to represent, let's say, if there is a business rule related to the total, there is a business rule that says that address could be updated. Okay, so the user interface could be a very good way to visualize what we have modeled, and that would be a great tool or a great model to share with the end user to verify your understanding. All right, so these are the recommended 5 models that would generally give us a sufficient understanding that we can start our development process on.